Everyone likes a good story. We may forget that in a context in which the visual media, television, the internet, and computer games often serve as our primary conduits of information. Even in this disciple study, printed materials go hand in hand with images on video. But not so in the ancient world. The Gospel of Mark uses words and the surprise of narrative to present his story of Jesus. Tom Boomershine reminds us of this oral quality of Mark and points out that the writer of that gospel unravels the identity of Jesus as if it were a mystery story. But the entertainment value of this gospel is only part of its purpose. More important is the mystery, demonstrated in the closing scene of women gathered around a tomb. Of what will Jesus' disciples do now that they know who Jesus is and what he has accomplished in his resurrection? As contemporary readers of that mystery, the question is ours as well.
Mark is right up front about what he thinks about Jesus. The beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Christ means, of course, Messiah. In Hebrew, Mashiach, one who has been anointed. But Jesus wasn't the first one to be called Christ. Saul and David were both Messiahs, both anointed by Samuel. And in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, they are both called Xristos, kuriou, the Christ of the Lord, almost identical to what the angel calls Jesus in Luke's story of Jesus' birth. You remember. To you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is Christ, the Lord. Xristos, kurios. But soon, Jesus starts saying strange and mysterious things for a Messiah. Instead of recruiting soldiers to join an army, the first disciples he calls are fishermen. He has a triumphant first day of ministry in Capernaum, casting out an evil spirit from a guy who started yelling at him in the middle of the synagogue service. And after the service, he heals the mother-in-law of one of his new disciples, Simon. And that night, they bring to him all the people in the village who were sick and possessed by demons. The whole city was around the door. And he healed many who were sick with various diseases, and he cast out many demons. But the end of the story is puzzling. He wouldn't allow the demons to speak because they knew him. Why? Why wouldn't he want people to know? This is the first of many strange and puzzling things about Jesus the Messiah. After he heals a leper, Jesus says to him, "Now look, you say nothing about this to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest and offer for your cleansing what Moses required." But the leper became an instant evangelist and proclaimed Jesus' healing everywhere, so that Jesus had to hide out in the countryside. So you can see one reason why Jesus told them to keep quiet. He knew his ministry would generate publicity. And throughout most of Mark's story, Jesus tries to keep his messianic identity secret. After Jesus heals many who came to him from all over the region, from Galilee, Judea, beyond the Jordan, even from Tyre and Sidon up in Lebanon, the demons, when they see him, fall down at his feet and worship him. But Jesus doesn't allow them to speak because they knew him. When Jesus heals the daughter of Jairus, the chief of the local synagogue, he tells Jairus and his wife to say nothing about this to anyone. After he heals the deaf and dumb man in the Decapolis, the 10 cities, he tells them to say nothing about this to anyone. But the more Jesus said, keep quiet, the more people proclaimed his miraculous deeds everywhere. At the end of the story, they say, he does everything well. He even makes the deaf hear and the dumb speak. So the next time Jesus heals someone, a blind man in the town of Bethsaida, Jesus sends him straight to his house and tells him, don't even go into the village. Why? The secret kept getting leaked. It's interesting to note that this healing of the blind man happens just before Jesus asks the disciples, who do people say that I am? And they answer, some say you're John the Baptist, others Elijah, or one of the prophets. To which Jesus responds, but who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter answers, you. You are the Christ. And once again, Jesus commands them to tell no one about him or about who he was. He acts as if he were some kind of spy or secret agent. Why did he want to keep his identity secret? A clue. When Jesus and the disciples were leaving Galilee on the way to Jerusalem, and Jesus wanted no one to know it because he was telling his disciples, the Son of Man will be betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And after 3 days, he will be raised. Is the reason for the secret that Jesus knows he will get killed? That's what happens. At his trial before the Sanhedrin, the chief priest asks him directly, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. And the chief priest tore his robes and said, what need do we have for further witnesses? You have heard his blasphemy. How does it appear to you? And they all condemned him as deserving death. So what happens when Jesus reveals the secret and announces publicly who he is? He is condemned to death. Now this motif in Mark has been called the Messianic secret. And it has been the subject of study by many scholars of the Gospels. Many theological explanations of the Messianic secret have been proposed. In recent years, scholars have begun to study Mark's Gospel as a story. In fact, it seems certain that Mark was a story that was told from beginning to end by storytellers in the ancient world. Eusebius, writing some 300 years later, says that Mark himself wrote the Gospel and then went to Egypt and preached the story that he had written. This reflects what people in the ancient world assumed. Books got published in the ancient world not by being printed, but by being recited out loud. Only 10 to 15% of the people in the ancient world could read, and so written manuscripts were few, and the way that things were published was by public readings. I would encourage you to read Mark's story out loud to yourselves or in your group some evening. If you read fairly quickly and energetically, you can read the gospel in 2 to 2.5 hours. If you read it in a group, divide up the reading. Everyone should prepare so that each reader can read with vitality and energy. Avoid reading, as we so often do in church, with a flat reading. You will all fall asleep. Even reading Mark with interest, you'll get tired. It's because we're not used to listening to long stories like this. Viewing films and television programs, 2-3 hours, no problem. Listening to long stories read aloud, we're not used to it. This was ancient entertainment. In the evenings, people in antiquity told stories and sang songs. So listen to Mark's story read aloud sometime. Hear the gospel as a story. And this will help you hear what Mark was doing in the Messianic Secret. He was making the gospel a mystery story, a story so interesting that people would get hooked and stick around for the ending of this long story. Hearers would want to find out the solution to the mystery. I'm sure that many of you are mystery story buffs. You've read stories featuring Sherlock Holmes, Mrs. Marple, Ellery Queen. I grew up reading the stories of the Hardy Boys. Lots of girls have read the Nancy Drew mysteries. In a good mystery, once you get hooked, you stay to the end. You got to find out what happened. That's what Mark was after. He wanted his listeners to get so involved in the Jesus story that they would keep listening to the end. And what was the end of Mark's story? Well, the puzzle of this story of the Messiah continues right up to the end. After all, how can a Messiah get killed and save Israel, let alone the world? In Mark's story, the resurrection is the answer. God in Jesus was saving the world by setting all people free from the powers of sin and death. But what did that mean? What did the resurrection mean? Well, for one, it meant that our choice of Barabbas, a warrior who advocated violence and warfare as the way to defeat the powers of evil, was the wrong choice. Mark proclaims that Jesus was the Messiah, rather than the warrior messiahs like Barabbas or even Saul and David. Mark was written during or shortly after the disastrous Jewish War of 66 to 70 AD, in which the temple and much of Jerusalem was destroyed, and thousands of Jews were taken as slaves to Rome. One of the major meanings of the gospel of Jesus Christ is that God has intervened in history to set us free from this endless cycle of warfare and revenge by the power of love and forgiveness. The resurrection was the vindication of Jesus' way, a way of nonviolence. And Jesus' disciples lived it out. For the next 300 years, there are no records of acts of violence by Christians. Mark's ending is like the rest of the gospel. It's a mystery. 3 women, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, probably Jesus' mother, and Salome went to the tomb. When they went into the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in white who told them that Jesus had been raised. And he said to them, "Go and tell his disciples and Peter, he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he said to you." Keeping secrets is no longer necessary. The lid is off. It's time to tell the story. And what do the women do? Going out from the tomb, the women fled, for fear and trembling had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone. For they were afraid. What? What? This is the ultimate irony. Jesus kept telling them to keep the secret, and they kept blowing his cover and announcing it everywhere. Hey, you know what? This guy, Jesus, he's the Messiah. Now they're told to announce that he has been raised. And what do? They say nothing to anyone. Why were they afraid? Because as women they weren't supposed to speak in public? Because they might be made fun of and look foolish, be shamed? Because they might get in trouble? Because they might get killed? Same mystery. Same answer. Makes sense to me. And it happened. Many women were martyred in the Colosseum in Rome. Christian women such as Perpetua and Felicitas were killed all over the Roman world in substantial numbers over the next 300 years. And just as being put to shame or killed for the sake of the gospel were possibilities then, they are possibilities now, in some parts of the world more than others. But they are really possible. We are the women. We are the disciples called to go and tell. Do we? Or are we afraid to speak in public, to bear witness to our faith, to act on our faith that Jesus is the Messiah, to get killed rather than to kill? Now that the secret is out and we are called to tell the story, what will we do? What will we say?